What game to play? Ooh, Donkey Kong 64. I've never actually played this one. Be a good one to go with next. Let's see. And in and power. I don't have an expansion pack. I've never had one of those. Well, I guess it's time to go get one. Well, folks, I'm DK May, and this is So I Played the Nintendo 64. Let's talk about that one. And that right there is what prompted the crux of this video. You see, we started on this adventure to Retro Rick's in Conway, Arkansas, thinking I'm gonna go get an expansion pack for my Nintendo 64 because I never had one, which meant I never actually got to play Donkey Kong 64 on my Nintendo 64. And spoiler alert, I never got to play Majora's Mask on it. I actually played it on my GameCube, and I started playing that about a week ago. Talk about a sleeper. I slept on it. Everybody knows the game's great. But on the way, my daughter asked me something. She goes, "Hey Dad, you know, you got all these old games. I get it. But what makes the Nintendo 64 so special to you? Or to anyone else for that matter?" And it got me thinking, you know, the Nintendo 64 is kind of seeing a revival at the moment, so it seemed topical to kind of explain to her a little bit of the history. So I was like, well, child, way back almost 30 years ago in the late 1900s, September 29th in 1996 to be exact, Nintendo released in North America the Nintendo 64 for $199. And that's about what they sell for today, so make of that what you will. But what made it so special at the time was its drastic push into 3D gaming. And it was arguable. There was a lot of people on both sides going, yay 3D, or look at the big blocky chunky graphics, it's 3D, but big whoop, look at what we can do with side scrollers. And it didn't take long for other people to pick up that 3D was kind of the way a lot of things were going. That didn't mean everything needed to go 3D. There were a lot of things that were arguably better in the two dimensions, Castlevania being one of them. But I do personally believe that Castlevania for the Nintendo 64, that we all lovingly just call Castlevania 64, was too harshly judged at its time. Maybe. Got a copy of that I'm going to take a look at soon and see, is it rose-tinted glasses or what? But anyway, back to the Nintendo 64. 3D graphics was the forefront of it, and it delivered this funky new controller. It's kind of like an inverted trident that you got three legs there, figure it out however you want to hold it. If you didn't think that kids all over the country were laughing about it and coming up with the innuendos and making fun of each other for the way we were holding it, then you're out of touch, because we were. Or maybe it was just my friends and I, but I know a lot of people had a lot of things to say about the funky shape of it. But with those 3D games came the need to have a really good way to control in the third dimension. And, well, we can say that Nintendo kind of got that, because every controller after that has that. I mean, even the DS finally gave up and went with the analog stick on the 3DS. But it's kind of rough these days. You know, there's new mods for it, what have you. Bizarre controller, but it really did grow on us. And there's people today that'll argue that it's super comfortable, and that there's other people that says it was absolutely terrible and it kept them from ever wanting to play the system. I like it. I personally feel like a lot of the games that if you try to emulate it for the Nintendo 64 and you don't have a controller hooked up and you're not able to play with a controller, then you're missing half the experience, because they're really weird. But the other piece of the puzzle there was cartridges. The Nintendo 64 still had cartridges. So there was that piece where it was like, hey, it's a little more durable, right? You know, you're not going to scratch up the cartridge and it's going to quit working, just blow in it and keep going. But the reality is, in 1996 and the subsequent years, it really did kind of play second fiddle to the PlayStation. The PlayStation was like, this is the bee's knees. I mean, the PlayStation sold significantly more. There were significantly more games that were released for it. In fact, in North America, there was just under 300 games released for the Nintendo 64, which meant, in a good way, if you had a friend that had a Nintendo 64, or you met someone today that you didn't know back then, you probably played the same games, because it wasn't like we had a huge library to diversify and find all kinds of different things. But the games that were there, while there is some slop, don't get me wrong, And there are some really bad Nintendo 64 games. For the most part, those top tier games, those top 50 that everybody loves, they hold up and they're still really, really good games. And speaking of holding up, that kind of brings me into today, modern, end of 2025, 2026, the 30-year anniversary of the Nintendo 64. And like I said, we're sort of seeing a revival. Why is that? A big part of that is thanks to modern console makers, which I'll talk about those in a second. The other piece is a revival of CRT lovers, people like me who went out and found a massive cathode ray tube TV and brought it home and decided, hey, my old games are where I want to be and playing. Let's do that. But the reality is a lot of people are using scalers. So RetroTink came out with scalers. There's other scalers so you can hook them up to modern TVs and they look good. Because if you buy one of these cheap ones, I bought one just for the sake of an event that we're doing so that we can play some GoldenEye on a flat screen. But man, they look terrible. Please don't buy the $15 ones. Spend some good money. Back to the other thing that we were talking about with the console makers. Well, Analogue released their Analogue 3D console. And while it keeps selling out like crazy, it's a modern take on the Nintendo 64 that plays those original cartridges. It'll play ROM carts too now. They fixed that. So if you're into that kind of scene, you can get ROM carts. But they play original hardware. They will play with the original controllers. They got new controllers that you can get for it. If you don't want to use the old style and you're stubborn like that, that's fine. Play how you want to play. And then you got ModRetro coming out with their M64. Now, if you're familiar with ModRetro, and if you're not familiar with ModRetro, they released the Chromatic. It was a Game Boy Color style handheld console that was designed to play Game Boy and Game Boy Color games. And now they're giving the same treatment over to the Nintendo 64 with their FPGA system that will allow you to play, just like the Analogue 3D, older games on newer hardware. Replicates it. It's not an emulator, it's more of a replicant. It's a copy, very good copy that plays it. And they all overclock, which lets you run the game smoother than the N64 did. And as somebody that's gone back and has been playing a lot of Nintendo 64 games, it makes me wonder how I'm so picky about frame rates on this computer behind me when I was playing and still play at those frame rates that thing dishes out. But it's allowing for people who don't want to play with original hardware or don't have original hardware and don't want to mod original hardware or buy a $500 scaler to be able to play on a modern TV. They can get one of these newer systems that are ranging from $200 to $270. I know it's expensive, but again, a $500 scaler or even a $100 scaler on top of a $100 console, now you're spending just as much to just use OEM hardware. Thankfully for me, I still have two Nintendo 64s. I've got mine and my wife's. Don't tell her that I'm modifying the daylights out of hers because I wanted an atomic purple console. And by George, I'm going to have one sort of. We're seeing new hardware being able to take advantage of these old games. And that is giving new life and bringing people back to the console that maybe played it when they were younger and haven't had it since. Or people that completely missed the pre-6th generation. So again, 5th generation consoles and want to experience Ocarina of Time, Super Mario 64, Mario Kart even, or the better Diddy Kong Racing. Take it what you will. I prefer Diddy Kong Racing. There was a story there. There were bosses. It was super fun. Anyway, what does this mean for the future of the Nintendo 64 as we approach 2026 or we're into 2026 and beyond? Well, the truth is, if you're getting in now or you've still got your old console, the truth about collecting Nintendo 64 stuff is actually really fun. I've had to make a list for myself because I've trying to avoid that impulse, going into a retro game store and going, well, there's a game, it's $5. There's a game, it's $10. No. I made a list. I got about 60 titles on there, and I divided them from games that I owned at one point, games that my friends had that I loved playing, and then games that I rented or wanted. And that's just one column. I'm not splitting it up. I rented a ton of games back then, and you really can't do that today. Man, that'd be great if you could do that, because then you could just go rent the games you wanted to play. But for the most part, the games, the controllers, memory packs, rumble packs, yada yada, they're not terribly expensive, especially for the retro gaming scene. And that is always likely to change. They only made so many of those games. They only made so many controllers, and you're going to have to get reproduction controllers at a certain point, unless you're like me and you really enjoy rebuilding these thumbsticks. But the rest of the controller holds up pretty well. Now, here's the thing. I brought up ModRetro more than anything because with their chromatic or their version of the Game Boy Color, new games are coming out for the Game Boy Color. And they're remaking some games and they're making it better and new for this old hardware. And I'm really, really hopeful that we see the same thing happen with the M64 release. Now, as somebody who's gaming on original hardware, I really hope if they do come out with new games that they work on the N64 and not just the M64, but also work on the Analog 3D, because even though that may be a competing console, it only betters the entire experience. So I'm really hopeful that we're going to see new Nintendo 64 games in the year 2026. How wild is that? 30 years later, new games. I'm excited for it. As somebody who's revisiting and rebuilding their childhood collection that they don't have anymore and enjoying that piece of the collecting scene, like I said, I'm not trying to collect all of the games. I'm really only trying to rebuild my personal collection, collect the ones that my friends had, and then the few that I rented that I absolutely adored. Some of them are stupid expensive. I'm sorry, I'm not paying $100 plus for a cartridge that somebody's been sliding around on a bedroom floor for 25 years. I'll buy a reproduction cart, but we'll talk about reproduction carts later because I have some feelings about those. I don't exactly hate them, but I totally understand why people do. So if you want to see all that and keep up as we move through the catalog of Nintendo 64 onto my PlayStation 2, onto the GameCube, 6th generation is probably peak gaming in my opinion, and we're going to get to those before too terribly long, but we got a lot to do and see along the way, and I hope that you join me here at So I Played as we make our way down that road, and I'll see you in the next one.